So let's have a look back now at one of the biggest stories that Breakfast have reported on recently, and it's been, of course, Olivia,
quite a week for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, especially as his plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda has been ruled unlawful. Let's take a look.
In light of the evidence which I have summarised, the Court of Appeal concluded that there were such grounds. We are unanimously of the view that they were entitled to reach that conclusion. The Home Secretary's appeal is therefore dismissed.
While he was wasting his time on this gimmick, the asylum backlog has swollen to 175,000 people. Plan A has failed. Can he assure the British public that he will drop what his former Home Secretary calls his magical thinking and start treating small boat crossings with the seriousness that they deserve?
Talks about taking small boats crossing seriously. He's opposed every single measure that we have taken, Mr. Speaker.
That's a three-page letter here to the Prime Minister, Suella Braverman, now the former Home Secretary, makes a number of claims about the PM which will make them wince in Downing Street. She says you've manifestly and failed to deliver every single one of these key policies. Either your distinctive style of government means you are incapable of doing so, or I must now conclude you never had any intention of keeping your promises. It's absolutely brutal, this note here from Suella Braverman. She's very concerned about the direction the government's taking. We are now seeing a complete schism opening up between the right of the party.
The Supreme Court has judged that the Rwanda policy requires a set of changes in order to be lawful. I do not agree with this decision, but I respect it and accept it. But we need to end the merry-go-round. I said I was going to fundamentally change our country, and I meant it. So I'm also announcing today that we will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation. This will enable Parliament to confirm that with our new treaty, Rwanda is safe.
Well, what a week. Well, joining us now is Suzanne Evans, political commentator, and Henry Hill, the deputy editor of Conservative Home. Where do we start? Suella sacked, Rwanda dead in the water, Rishi Sunak turned into Rishi Sunk, Braverman bites back, David Cameron back from the dead. Suzanne, where would you like to start? Take your pick.
I don't know. I feel like I'm back in 1997 again, really. I think that was the most dramatic political change of my lifetime so far, when you'd had, over a decade of Conservative rule, and then suddenly the Labour Party under Tony Blair sweeps to power with a 179 majority after a catastrophic catalogue of errors by the Conservatives. And it feels very much like that again now. So we've had Cameron come back from the dead, as you said. We've had Suella sacked, despite the fact that for many Conservative-leaning people, she seemed to be the only person that was saying what they thought and what they believed. I said before he sacked Suella that if he did sack her, he'd be sunk, Sunak. And it looks like that's what's happening. Look at the polls we've wake of this week. The Conservatives are now as low as 19% in one poll, 19%, whereas Labour are now on 50% in their highest poll this week. And interestingly, the Reform Party, of course, also doing quite well, up as high as 11, although other polls put them much lower than that. It certainly is a dramatic time in politics, and I don't think there's ever been a time in politics when, excluding in the wake of the Brexit referendum, that the upper echelons of government have been more out of touch with the ordinary person on the street. It is quite astonishing.
Yeah, Henry, it does feel a little bit like end of days territory for the Conservative Party now, polling at 19%. They don't seem to have any cohesive sort of vision. I mean, on the one hand, they're bringing back David Cameron, who's seen as a sort of liberal mainstay, and on the other hand, they're pushing ahead with the Rwanda plan and introducing quite extreme emergency legislation to try and make it work. I think we all know that we're heading for a Tory defeat, but could we see the end of the Conservatives for a generation?
No, potentially. It depends in part on the scenario that's haunting the Conservatives now is Canada 1993, right? The Canada 1993 general election.
This is geekier than
the Progressive Conservatives went from being in government with a majority to having 2 seats. And the thing that did that was there was a split on the right and there was another party, which is why I think Rishi Sunak is bringing forward this legislation, why he's going heavy on small boats, because although obviously there was a shift to the left in the current cabinet reshuffle, he can't afford to have a big block of Tory voters kind of defect, because, you know, there's Nigel Farage floating around out there and all this worry about splitting the vote. But yeah, absolutely. The problem for the government, they've changed leader so many times, they've changed party direction so many times, they've not got a coherent vision left. All they've got is this desperate kind of sort of trying to win over people with very targeted measures that they've polled to death. It's not going to do it.
Potholes.
Yeah. And Suzanne, do you think Rishi Sunak is Rishi Sunk? I mean, the bottom line is, it seems to me that whatever he tinkers with, we got Suella Braverman. I said to Mark Harper yesterday, I said, you're the transport minister, and Suella's the backseat driver. Who's in control?
Well, I think that's a very good question. There's all kinds of conspiratorial answers you could put to that. But let's stick with your question, is Sunak sunk? Yeah, I absolutely think he is, really. He's a government that is floundering around. I mean, let's just take one, but I think quite serious example, the whole issue of national security. Clearly, he hasn't managed to stop the boats. That's a massive problem with national security. Opening the borders to terrorists, there seems to be this idea that international law trumps British law, and we have to let terrorists in because of other threats from lawyers, both in this country and in international courts as well. So that's an issue. So what does he do at a time when we're all worried about national security? Well, he brings in David Cameron, who we know since he's been out of office, well, indeed, when he was Prime Minister, was very much on the side of China and has been too while he's been out of office. Cameron comes back into the cabinet, and suddenly the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, is talking about watering down the National Security and Investment Act so that more foreign companies can invest here and take over British companies. They're all over the place. They don't know what they're doing. Remember, the National Security and Investment Act only came in 2 years ago. So that's one that's been ripped up as well. The whole thing's a complete disaster. I mean, it'd be very interesting. You know, Jeremy Hunt's going to be delivering the autumn statement later in this week. What's he going to say? Is that going to bring any Conservative voters back on board? He is really going to have to pull a rabbit out of the hat to do that. We're looking at tax cuts. We're looking at scrapping inheritance tax. He'll have to keep businesses happy by scrapping the so-called tourist tax. Sunak, you remember when he was Chancellor, stopped foreign tourists claiming their VAT back. There's all kinds of things he's going to have to do. And I just don't think he's got anything really that's going to be big enough to get the Conservative heartlands back on board again.
Talking about rabbits out of hats, Henry, what on earth is going to happen with the Rwanda plan now? Because Rishi Sunak has this slightly mad plan, by the sounds of it, to try and get this emergency legislation through the Houses of Parliament. Does he stand any chance of success? I mean, you've got quite a lot of Conservatives in the Commons who weren't that happy with the Rwanda plan to begin with. Then, of course, you've got the House of Lords who clearly aren't going to like it. Is this plan really just dead in the water now?
Essentially, yeah, up until the general election. In theory, as a constitutionalist, I love Rishi Sunak's legislation. The idea of Parliament just declaring Rwanda to be legal is just the kind of thing that the British Parliament can do. But no, in practical terms, the House of Lords, on its own, before you even consider the Commons, the House of Lords can hold up a bill for up to 13 months. There are fewer than 13 months until the next general election, unless he holds it in sort of January 2025. So, no, absolutely not. I think what's going to happen here is the government is lining up to spend a year having a row and then go on and fight the election on it.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got to feel a little bit sorry for Rishi Sunak. He has been trying his best with this, and it does seem a bit as though everyone's against him. He wants to get control of our borders, but no one else seems to want to.
Well, let us know what you think out there. Thank you very much for joining us, Henry Hill and Suzanne Evans.